Hey folks, I'm Dr. Scott Hinsey, and I'll be walking you through this semester of biopsychology. We're going to be working with a biopsychology textbook by Pinnell and Barnes, and then adding on to that as we go. But when I refer to a textbook, that's the one that I'm referring to here. So welcome, and let's get started. So, as with any textbook, we're going to start with an overview. So, what the heck is biopsychology? Sometimes when we think about biopsychology, we immediately start thinking about neurosurgery, drilling into people's heads to maybe solve psychological problems. And people actually did this sort of thing. You can see that even in the um, late 1400s, early 1500s. Some artists, at least, like Hieronymus Bosch, felt like this field was a bit silly, and it was for a time. Well, we've improved a bit. So let's walk through what biopsychology is nowadays, and how it fits in with the rest of neuroscience. And then in the next video, closing up chapter one, we'll talk about different areas of biopsychology. So here's our definition. It's the study of the biological basis of behavior. So ology means science or study, right? And then bio and psychology, right? Biopsychology. So just breaking this all down, we've got the bio part, the psychology part, and then we pull it together to be a study. Essentially, one way to think about biopsychology is to look at anything that you learned in Intro to Psych and just ask the question of what is the biological basis of that? How does the body do that stuff? So, memory. How does your body, how does your brain, how does your nervous system um, help you to form memories? Okay. Emotions. How do your genetics and your development and your biology contribute to your emotional processing? And you can do that for any of the chapters, any of the topics in Intro to Psych. We've got a at least somewhat of a handle on the biological basis of those things, or at least there are people that study that. And that's this course. We're going to give you kind of an overview of a lot of those topics and what we know about them biologically. Now, this is going to be complex, and basically, for any topic that we encounter, we're going to be able to give you an overview of what we know, but there's going to be a lot of open questions. And this is really fascinating that there are lots of open questions. But it might also be a little confusing or frustrating because we don't necessarily know 100% how the brain does these things. I want to encourage you to think of that as an opportunity to ask interesting questions about fun, complex systems. Okay. And we've known that the brain's very complex for a long time. Michael Gazzaniga noted that the brain is perhaps the ultimate challenge for us. The ultimate challenge for the brain is to understand itself. Some facts here. The students in my class, I'm not going to test you on this. These are just fun facts about how complex the brain is. In about 3 pounds of matter, we've got somewhere around 86 billion neurons. Those 86 billion neurons don't just connect one neuron to the other. Like train cars, they're connected in webs and networks. So there's maybe 100 trillion connections between neurons, 100 trillion of those, and those fire off at different rates. And you might know that when one neuron connects to another at 100 trillion times, that there are neurotransmitters passing to communicate from one to the other. These are things like dopamine, serotonin, glutamate. There's not just five of those, there's over 100, maybe 200 different chemicals that operate as neurotransmitters. So you got 86 billion neurons connecting at 100 trillion connections and sending different neurotransmitters at different connections, doing different things. Okay. So that nervous system is very complex. Don't forget that all of this is going to be developing over years, and that can change, and developing based on genetic differences as well. So that's more complexity. And then we need to take all of this complexity and try to explain all of psychology, right? So all of your behaviors, all of your emotions, your social relationships, um, intelligence, everything, right? Everything you've thought and done and that sort of thing might have a biological basis to it. Okay. So you can see that we're not going to answer all of the questions in this class. Um, we're going to give you some of the tools for thinking about how the brain and the body does some of the psychology and how we can think about biological explanations and biological factors that we can think about for psychology. Now, beyond the definition of biopsychology itself, it's important to think about where it sits with other fields. And biopsychology falls under the umbrella. So here's biopsychology, and then there's a bigger umbrella called neuroscience. Okay, and neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system. Okay, so there's lots of people who do neuroscience who are not biopsychologists, but biopsychologists fall under the umbrella of neuroscience because we're studying the nervous system. Here's some of those other fields of neuroscience. Students in my class don't need to memorize all of these, but you should be familiar with at least a couple of these. Um, so some people study neuroanatomy or physiology, so studying the structure of the nervous system, parts of the brain, that sort of thing, or the function of the nervous system. Just how does your brain work biologically? Some people study chemicals like hormones. That's neuroendocrinology is the fancy word, or things like neurotransmitters, neurochemistry. Okay, so we might get down into biopsychology or biochemistry, or we might do anatomy and physiology. And then some people do a little bit more applied work like neuropathology, studying diseases and conditions, and potentially how those can be treated. And some people study neuropharmacology. So how can we develop drugs that influence your brain in some way? Um, I don't mean like illicit drugs. I mean like, you know, medications, that sort of thing. So all of these fields, typically you'll find these in a neuroscience department or a biology department or in medicine and that sort of thing. And they wouldn't be found in a psychology department um, because they're not biopsychologists. So where does biopsychology fit in? Well, biopsychology, according to your textbook, kind of sits in the middle here, and it is integrative. Another word for integrative is unifying. So it integrates or unifies all these other fields, and then it aims to answer questions or solve problems about human psychology, behavior, thinking, emotions. Okay? So we're going to take from neuroanatomy and physiology. How does the brain um, how structured and how does it function? Your hormones, your chemistry, diseases of the brain or conditions of the brain, and then chemicals, drugs that can influence the brain. We're going to pull from all of these to try to answer questions about psychology. Right? So if you think about depression, for example, right? Are there differences in the structure or function of the brain in people who have depression? Are there hormone differences or effects? Are there neurochemical differences, like neurotransmitters operating differently? Um, is there actual disease or changes to the brain that as a result of depression or that might cause depression symptoms, neuropathological symptoms? And then, are there drugs that you can take to influence depression? So you can see just with that example, you might be aware that a lot of those things go into diagnosing, treating, and understanding how depression works. Okay? So this is what we mean is biopsychology is part of neuroscience and it integrates the different fields. Okay, so with that in mind, we have a general understanding of what biopsychology is, and we'll leave that there for the first video. And next time, we'll talk about different types of biopsychology. So biopsychology is a part of neuroscience, and then there's parts of biopsychology for next time.